You know, it's such a pleasure having a member of Congress join us today, the Honorable Richard McCormick from the 7th District of Georgia, a decorated Army veteran, emergency room physician, and he's joining us live from the Ronald Reagan Library in California. Congressman, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. It's one of the greatest places to be. I love Reagan. He's one of my favorite all-time presidents. It's an honor to participate in the Economic Forum. Just for a point of contention, I was in the Marines for 16 years, served with the Army, cross-deck with airborne forces, but I was a pilot in the Marine Corps before going into the Navy as an ER doc. So I come from an Air Force family, so I'm all sorts of confused, but really appreciate the armed services, really rejoiced in those members who have gone before us and the sacrifice they made on Memorial Day just a few days ago. So very honored to be with you today.
Congressman, what does it mean now that the Supreme Court has lifted the Biden era deportation for almost 500,000 people protection, and now that President Trump can move forward?
I think it's huge. First of all, this is going to be really interesting to see all these different things play out in court, whether it be deportations, immigration, tariffs. It seems like President Trump's getting challenged every step of the way. Now, I agree that executive orders are probably not the best way to govern, especially in the United States where we have a balanced system of governing. But there are checks and balances, and I think that we're going to try to codify some of the things that he's getting done through executive privilege. I think deporting people who came here illegally it has a different due process. Now, it does have due process, and you know the famous one that we deported somebody back to El Salvador with, he had two due process where two judges told him he had to go. Maybe not back to El Salvador, he had to go. Now, the reason he had an objection to go back to that country is that another gang wanted to do him harm, apparently, but that gang no longer exists. But I'm glad to see the Supreme Court is acting and that we're going to get some things done that really need to get done for this great nation to protect us, to protect our borders, protect us from economic harm, from child trafficking. I think hundreds of thousands of children child trafficked, and nothing was done by the Biden administration. Shame on them.
Congressman, you mentioned the legislative process. Why is it that the president doesn't use the legislative process to get these things done? He has a majority in the Senate and the House. Why not?
Well, he tries, but we move at a glacial pace on purpose. You know, the Constitution was designed on purpose to be inefficient for our government. It was designed that way so that we'd become never more powerful than the people, so we wouldn't rule over them but serve them. We are here for one purpose and one purpose only: to defend their inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everything else is just more government. Now, we have some necessary things we need to do, but the president is a high-energy president who wants to get a lot done, and he does not want to wait, and I get that. So he's going to do everything in his power to do what he believes is right for this great nation, and then he has to wait for us to catch up, because it takes a long time to come up with laws that are passed through both the Congress and then through the Senate, and then through the White House. It just takes a long time. He doesn't have that sort of patience. So he's trying to do whatever he can to right now under emergency authority, and then let us catch up to him as fast as possible.
You know, here's what fascinates me. I decided to go back and examine some of the same policies with the Biden-Harris administration. And there's no question in my mind, if Trump was pushing the student loan program and forgiving their debt, the media and the courts certainly would not allow that to happen. Now, there's this argument that we have these activist judges, because Schumer has made it clear that he has appointed over 200 activist justices on the court. Are they being fair to the president, a standard that Biden did not have to deal with when he was president of the United States?
Of course. I mean, we've seen a lot of liberal judges being very activist. We saw it in voting. We saw it in Georgia, where they reapportioned the Georgia district lines just because they wanted to create another Democratic district. You see this all the time right now, especially with the liberals. They love to use activism inside the law because they don't have to vote on it. It's a great way for them to have authority. They're not constitutional rulings. If you look at most of the Supreme Court rulings and what the liberals do, they don't quote the Constitution. They quote European law, they quote some other standards, but they don't go with the Supreme Court doesn't hold up the Constitution when it comes to liberals, and that's what's really dangerous. Is they have another ideology, and a lot of times it ties back into socialism or some sort of other ideology that is not American, and that's usually not good for America.
What I find fascinating about that, I read recently on the president's social media where he went after Leonard Leo and others who recommended what he considered to be Supreme Court justices that don't necessarily adhere to what the president wants. And so we're not just talking about liberal activist judges, Congressman McCormick. These are people that were actually appointed by the president himself.
Yeah. Well, remember that not everything the president wants to do is constitutional. And I'm sure he doesn't think that way. He always says, hey, look, I'll defer to the Supreme Court, whatever they decide. But the president wants to get things done. He is a go-getter. He's used to doing business, and he doesn't want to wait. And sometimes that slow pace of the government is what he hates. And he doesn't wait. President never is lacking of criticism of people getting in the way of doing what he believes is the right thing to do. But I think the Supreme Court is there for a reason. We have to respect the balance of power. What I'm really worried about, we probably need to make a legislative effort, is make sure that the Supreme Court cannot be packed by future presidents, that it cannot be expanded past 9. That really worries me because it's been done before. FDR did it, and we want to make sure that we don't pack the courts again when they realize that they can't win by using liberal judges. And so this is really important to the future. But I think it's okay to have some checks and balances. And I know that the president, I love what he does. And I appreciate what he does, but if the president has too much power, the next president, who may be a liberal, will do way worse things. And so we want to make sure we always have those checks and balances for when those things happen.
An exceptional point. Elon Musk has left the administration, and his parting shot was his harsh criticism of the budget that you and your colleagues just voted for by one mere vote. Certainly, Congressman Massey is pretty consistent. He feels that we're going over the cliff quickly, but he said the bill cannot be beautiful and bold, it can only be one, and that the president, in pushing this bill, undermined the goal of DOGE, which is to cut government spending to ensure that we don't go over the financial cliff.
Yeah, the interesting thing about DOGE is we can get a lot of those done in the rescission process with the president's help and there's voting on those line item things. It's kind of like, it's not really a line item veto, but it helps us get rid of a lot of that waste. But that's only, DOGE only appropriated, I think, $160 billion. That's a drop in the bucket. Man, that's about half, that's like even a half a year of deficit spending right now. Deficit spending. We have some much bigger problems. I agree with Elon. We need to be much more aggressive. I'm hoping the Senate will strip out SALT, which basically rewards liberal states like New York and California, adding $385 billion of deficit spending next year alone, which we're increasing our deficit spending by $415 billion next year. It'll be up to 456 the next year. That's not taking care of business. That's not addressing the deficit problem, the debt problem. That's why we got downgraded by Moody's. It's going to affect the prime rate. It's going to make everything more expensive. It's going to create some inflation. It's not good. It hasn't happened yet, but it's very, very real and potential. So I agree with Elon. I think we need to be more responsible. I'm hoping the Senate sends us back a more responsible package, strips out some IRA components, strips out the SALT, and we get back to a deficit neutral, at least, bill, because we eventually need to get to paying off some of this debt.
What do you say to your colleague, Congressman Tom Massey, who says that the bill that was just passed is Biden's bill on steroids?
Yeah, well, it's not on steroids, but it's definitely not a good bill in regards to debt and deficit. I love Thomas Massey, but the problem is if we voted against this and it ends up in the Democrats' hands, it ends up way worse. We don't get what we want. So we have an increase in taxes that would burden businesses and families all over the United States. The economy was slow. What we found when we originally passed the TCJA, which was prior to the Biden administration, you actually had lower taxes, and an increased revenue source because businesses expanded. Biden's administration actually was rewarded by that. And it was passed during the Trump administration. What Massey's referring to is the IRA and SALT and other provisions that basically added on to the debt that we never got rid of. So what happened back in 2008 when we had the housing crisis and we had this huge spike in spending, unlike World War II, where we came down with our deficit spending after World War II because we didn't have the emergency anymore, we never came down from the 2008 spending levels. Then we did it again when COVID came along. We spiked this huge record amount of increase in spending, and we never right-sided that again. So that's what he's referring to. We never got back to a responsible revenue source matching our spending, and that's why we're in a big trouble right now. It's going to come to a head soon.
Congressman Richard McCormick, who represents the 7th District of Georgia, former Marine, emergency room physician, joins us from the Reagan Library. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future, and we'll be back.